So you know how to get into a guard and look for openings in the opponent's armor to get an ansetzen in. Hooray! But what can you do when you are at the receiving end?
In our text, the 44a8, both terms, versetzen to parry and absetzen to set off, are mentioned.
For example, it says, if he parries the stab and presses your point onto your left side, or if he then moves through your sword below with the pommel and wants to set aside or wrench with it.
In the armored fencing section, however, this is not explained how to do it. So in the longsword section, it is. So let's take a look.
The term versetzen is used so many times in the text. Most importantly, it tells us not to parry like the common fencers that hit to the sword and not to the opponent. So, first hint. Versetzen seems to be a rather forceful action. So how should we do our versetzen? In a way that still threatens our opponent. Let's take that on how as an example. Instead of simply hitting the opponent's sword with our tip flying all over the place, we hit it in a way so that the tip is still pointed at the opponent's breast or face, so we can easily follow up with a thrust. Moreover, Versetzen happens out of the so-called Zufechten, when both opponents move into range of each other to engage in actions.
So versetzen seems to be an action for when your opponent gets into range. And it seems to be a technique which uses its force that goes against the attack of the opponent. So how do we transfer this into a short sword technique?
When getting a thrust by our opponent, it travels in a direct line towards us. We then use force to hit the weapon out of our way. Which part of our weapon points into the direction of the opponent is not as relevant as a longsword, since both ends can be used to inflict damage. Firstly, we can parry in front of our hand. Whether we hit the opponent's sword or the glove does not matter, both can happen. Secondly, we can parry between our hands. Also to note is that we can use the Versetzen from all three guards.
As you can see, when you use versetzen, you often lose direct control over your opponent's weapon.
However, because your opponent's weapon is offline and he needs time to recover, you can use this window to get an ansetzen in or land a murder stroke.
Don't make the mistake and parry all the time and use versetzen. You will be outmaneuvered at some point.
In the longsword section, Absetzen is a technique against thrusts and cuts from above. Cuts in short sword won't happen because they're useless. So let's focus on the thrusts. We first use a sweeping action to bring the thrust offline, blocking the weapon with our arm. By doing so, we push the thrust of our opponent offline. We then control the weapon and follow up with an attack from the bind.
So absetzen seems to be a technique where we can set aside the incoming attack. Also, we try to remain control of the opponent's blade so we can follow up with an attack. This differs a lot from the versetzen we talked about, where we use force into the way of the attack to redirect it and mostly lose control of it. Absetzen seems to be the opposite, where we try to wind out the attack rather than going by force against it. And again, let's try to translate this into short sword techniques.
We first use a sweeping action to bring the thrust offline, blocking the weapon with our arm. By doing so, we push the thrust of our opponent offline. We then control the weapon and follow up with an attack from the bind. The text mentions all three parts of your sword to set off the opponent's weapon. We can use the part in front of our left hand to set off the attack. We can use the part between our hands how we can go through below the opponent's sword with our right hand and set off with our right arm. As with Versetzen, Absetzen can be done from different guards against different thrusts. So you can also set off an attack between your legs with an Absetzen from the upper guard.
Absetzen is a technique which keeps you in the bind, different from Versetzen. So you must follow up with an action afterwards.
The text has a variety of techniques that can follow them. We will get into this in a later video.
In the heat of battle, Absetzen and Versetzen are so close to each other that it's sometimes really hard to differentiate between the two. This actually doesn't really matter as long as it works and it keeps you safe. You can train this by letting your opponent attack you and putting thrusts and ansetzen into different gaps into your armor. You then simply fend off the attack by using one of the two techniques shown before. Start slowly so you can plan your actions. Once you feel safe, you can get faster. It should be about that fast that you fail about 20% of the time. So now you know how to defend yourself against basic ansetzen maneuvers. One step closer to glory. Next time we'll be talking about how to get around absetzen and versetzen so we can outsmart our opponent. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time.